Good morning, everyone. My name is CLARY Chambers, and I am the founder of Spark Clarity. I have 3 pictures behind me of me throughout my life. And so what I want you to do is think in your mind where you think that I have been most creative throughout my life. And I know that a few of you are probably thinking right to the childhood photo because we often associate creativity with play and childhood. But for me, it's actually the photo of me with the bubbles. And there, I feel most creative. And I feel most creative there because I come up with creative solutions daily to thrive in a world that I feel is not set up for me. Okay, so 2 years ago, I went to an event. Check. No, it's here. 2 years ago, I went to an event by Happiness Habit 613. And at this event, they asked us, are we creative people? And if so, where in our lives do we feel most creative? And I think when asked this question, if you think about it for yourself, we often don't say that we are creative. We usually default to our friends who are artists or graphic designers, and we say, yes, that person is creative. But for me, I thought, yes, I am creative, and I am creative in the way that I come up with creative solutions daily to thrive in a world that I feel is not set up for me. So I've said that twice now, and I say it because it is an empowering tool that I use to let myself know that I am not helpless in the face of disability and illness. For myself, I have fibromyalgia as well as a learning disability. So what does that mean to have an invisible illness or to have an invisible disability or suffer from chronic pain? What that means is that when you look at me, for example, I appear to be able-bodied, in that you cannot tell that I am disabled by just looking at me. And so I'm going to give an example of some other invisible illnesses, some other invisible disabilities that can also result in chronic pain as well. And I'm going to ask you, if you feel comfortable at the end, to raise your hand if you identify with having one of those, or just simply know someone in your life who does. So invisible illnesses, invisible disabilities, chronic pain conditions can include diabetes, fibromyalgia, endometriosis, allergies, any mental health conditions such as anxiety or depression, learning disabilities, ADHD, and the list goes on. Lupus would count in there as well, so would epilepsy. So if you feel comfortable now, I'm going to ask, can you raise your hands if you yourself identify with having one of those or know someone who does? Wow, okay, I wasn't expecting that everyone would raise their hands pretty much. So now we can tell that this is something that definitely affects our whole community, our creative community as well. 1 in 10 folks in the US alone have fibromyalgia. So in a room full of 200 people here, it's statistically probable that 20 of us would have this condition. So I'm going to leave you with 3 takeaways now. This is the first one, of what we can do in order to make our spaces more inclusive. And I believe that every single person in this room has the agency to be able to make those changes. Whether you're in charge of your bedroom space, your office space, your community events, I believe we can all make actionable changes to allow all people with chronic invisible illnesses, invisible disabilities to thrive. So the first one is to reduce shame. And when you are ill, when you are a person who is sick, there is a lot of shame with being sick. People who have these conditions often feel that they cannot keep up with the pace that society has set and that we continue to reinforce. We need to create communities where people feel they are deserving of those accommodations. We need to create communities and groups where people feel that they are heard, that they are respected, and that they are believed. The second takeaway is acknowledge our blind spots. We are going to find that when we start to create more inclusive spaces, we're going to realize we didn't do the best that we could. And that's okay. Now that we know better, we need to do better. I find that the biggest deterrence for people to actually implement change and to implement things that will change their space is letting go of their ego and their ignorance. Now that we know better, we need to do better. We need to continue to make more changes than excuses. And the last one, and I love this one, is start where you are. Start by asking the people who are already coming into your spaces, what can we do to make the space more inclusive for you? And we need to dig deep. We need to ask questions like, how is the lighting in here? What are the chairs like? Don't assume that because no one has said anything at this point that it doesn't mean that there's any changes that can be made. Because I believe when we take the energy to put it in to make our spaces more inclusive, we allow these people who I believe are the most creative creative people in the world, because they too are coming up with creative solutions to thrive in a world that is not set up for them. Allowing them to be able to then use that creative potential to not just simply exist in the space, but to thrive in it allows for change, a different sort of change. And I believe this is a change that we are looking for in the world. My name is CLARY Chambers. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, I'm excited to welcome Amy, Connor, and potentially Ethan for part of the talk. Amy is founder of Baby's Business and Breakfast.
Excuse me, could you please hold my baby for me while I load my pitch deck? Is there a baby change table in this building? Do you mind if we eat snacks during the meeting? These are all questions that I've asked complete strangers over the past 3 years since becoming a parent. When I first had Ethan, I was living overseas, away from family, and I didn't feel like as a new mom, I could leave my baby with a stranger that I could trust. So I just started bringing him with me everywhere. And that included to startup accelerators, networking events, conferences, meetings, workshops, and even a job interview, which I'm pleased to say I got the job. No one ever gave me permission. No one asked me to do it. I just never thought that I couldn't. Sorry. And for the most part, I was right. We just wouldn't always be, should we say, the most comfortable. I've changed both of them on floors, tables, sofas, car seats, my stroller. One time I was told that I could walk across campus 5 minutes in the middle of winter to use the mother's room in -20 weather. That's why I did what I did. I had my stroller break down on a train platform before I was meant to do a presentation. And one time I drove off from Invest Ottawa at Bayview Yards, leaving my stroller on the sidewalk because I forgot to load it into the back of my car. I've never left my children, though, just their belongings, so far, knock on wood. Yeah, so I like to summarize those experiences as the good, the bad, and the ugly over the past few years, and luckily the bad ones have been few and far between. I've had my heart warmed by kind strangers offering to cut my food for me, make me a coffee, hold my child, and just complimenting me on how they thought it was brilliant that I was doing what I was doing, and they hope that their children could do the same someday. I've had people smile and nod as I pitched for professional development that was child-friendly, only to be met with, but there wouldn't actually be children in the building, would there? Yes, that would be the whole point. And I've had someone at a conference compare me bringing my baby with me to people who travel with children and inconvenience others on the flight and at the airports, even though he was sleeping in the carrier at the time. Sorry, I'm just going to have to... So what started off as me validating a business idea gradually became more and more about these encounters that I kept having when I brought my children into business settings. Why does it feel like parenthood... Do you want to hold it, Connor? Why does it feel like parenthood and professional development have to be mutually exclusive? Why does it feel like a special request to ask if there's a baby change table in the building? Why are most events held during daycare or school drop-off or pickup times? And how many people are we excluding when we don't ask these questions? Or when we do, can I get you to hold this so I can just hold it? Or when we do, but we don't actually address them. So I started going to more child-friendly places like parks and libraries, IKEA, and even a recent CreativeMornings event where I saw a woman with a baby. And I asked them, do you feel the same as me, or am I just the only one? And it turns out that most people did. And what I found as I pitched to other people in business settings was it wasn't just parents who felt this way, it's also caregivers who have to and choose to look after their loved ones. Young or old, people who don't want to have to compromise time with their loved ones feel like these experiences, events, and programming are just not designed with their needs in mind. So how do we make space for ourselves, and how do we as event planners make it more inviting for people to bring their loved ones into these spaces and participate. If you're an event planner or a creative professional, business owner, volunteer in an organization who's hosting events or programming for people, these are just some considerations that I've created in mini guides that we're going to link to after the talk. And so the time of your event, the time of day, if it's held during a time when people are traditionally having a family meal or have to do drop-off or pickup, can you enable them to participate remotely or live stream your event so that they still feel connected and can access the content? Can you provide mini baby microphones so the babies also feel? A friendly atmosphere makes all the difference. And if you don't have the facilities, but you have a warm smile and a welcome, I've been places before where I've just felt like I belong, and I've been places before that had facilities and I didn't feel like I belong. Those things are free. If you can also provide baby change facilities, that's amazing. I've even seen pop-up childcare lately over the past year for people who they recognize if they want that target audience to attend, they're going to have to remove that barrier for them. Lastly, I have some tips for people who want to venture out into business spaces and maybe haven't done it before. And that's all designed with the belief that, because we believe that parenthood and professional development, I didn't rehearse this with props, other than them. We believe that parenthood and professional development shouldn't be mutually exclusive. So this is, Ethan, this is the first time that we've presented in front of a group of people like this. Usually it's a smaller group, so I thank you for your time. And if you're interested in learning more, we're hosting our first pop-up event next week. That's child-friendly. We'll have a play area, feature successful business owners, and everyone is welcome. And I also provide a newsletter and post about my experiences bringing my children into business settings. So thank you for your time and have a great weekend.
Amazing. Can we just give her another round of applause? That's for you. Oh my gosh, you're amazing, Amy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ethan. And thanks, Amber, our dedicated care provider today. All right, let's get to it. I'm happy to introduce Tone to the stage.
My name's Tone Dreesen. I'm an architect, a dad, a husband, a father, and this August I'll be a grandfather. I run a small business here in Ottawa, and I do everything I can to try and create a balanced and inclusive office team. This is my team. Not pictured on the screen is Priska Shipwea, a young woman and single mom who just moved here from Africa, and Jean Daniel, a Swiss-Quebec architect who just started this week. We're a small office, and we work to bring interesting architecture to our city. We work hard to create equity and create interest and raise the idea that architects can help and be part of our communities. Our office is an old house, spread across 3 levels, and there's 2 unisex washrooms. When I started in the office 7 years ago, one of the first things I did was I changed the second floor garbage can. I did this just because I thought it was weird that the ground floor one had a lid and the second floor one didn't. Many of the women in the office thanked me for this. Puzzled, I asked my wife why this would be the case, and I got this explanation that this meant they didn't have to hide their garbage. I didn't understand why, and frankly, I still don't. This is something that's so very ordinary, and it happens every day. See, I was raised at a time when feminine hygiene was a taboo subject, or even more than it is now. There are all these vague references on TV to horseback riding on beaches, or earnest conversations between mothers and daughters that didn't really seem to talk about anything. It wasn't something I learned about, and I have, to this day, no lived experience of this. As Portnoy asks, Bloom County is my favorite cartoon. As Portnoy asks, what is feminine protection, a chartreuse flamethrower? So a few months back, I was in a construction meeting, and it was mostly men around the table, because it's mostly men in architecture, even though the numbers are shifting, albeit slowly. Half the graduates in architecture are women, but only a third of those licensed less than 5 years are women, and less than a quarter overall are women. So in putting this presentation together, I went looking for pictures. Most of them are the same, cold steel boxes that don't look easy to use or engender a sense of design quality. Because the subject of conversation was around vending machines in women's washrooms. Should they be provided or not? Because this wasn't part of the project that I had responsibility for, I just listened to the conversation and noticed the awkwardness, the men's discomfort, vague allusions to stuff, and I realized the absurdity of the situation. Here we were, a bunch of men debating whether or not we should put vending machines for tampons and pads, and I wondered why this was even a debate. So I thought about it and I wrote a blog. And like most blogs, it was designed to spark my thoughts and spark a conversation. So the most reaction I got, like any blog, was from my staff, from some of the women in my life who said, yeah, that's great. That's something that needs to be said. So what I argued is that periods happen, and they happen all the time, and often to some greater or lesser extent, they're unexpected. And the way we design women's washrooms, we design inequity. If it happens in the stall, it's awkward. At best, there's a vending machine and a woman has to get redressed, fumble for change in a non-existent pocket, leave the stall. Does anyone even carry spare change anymore? Again, I have no lived experience of this. My clothing has pockets. And if there's no vending machine, a woman has to go back to her desk or her high school locker to find pads or tampons she might have stashed, and then go grab her wallet, go out on an errand, make change, find a drugstore. And all of this while hoping her clothing doesn't get dirty or be late for a meeting, be late for class, and feeling rushed. Men, we don't have this experience. We've created a social structure where not only is this seen to be embarrassing, but we stigmatize women for being late for a meeting, for a very normal bodily function, and then we penalize them for how they deal with it. So then a few weeks ago, Elizabeth Renzetti wrote an article in the Globe and Mail about equity and menstrual health in the Globe. I absolutely love her writing, and I told her so, and we corresponded. She liked my blog, and she shared it. It sort of took off. Some people asked on Twitter if my grand solution as an architect was a basket in the back of a toilet tank, and I said, well, I guess so. I mean, it doesn't have to be sophisticated, right? Architects can help. So then a few weeks ago, BC moved to provide free menstrual products in BC schools. Research has shown that 1/7 of all women have decreased engagement with school activities because they get their period and they can't get access to products or can't afford them. This means of 630,000 high school students in Ontario, half of whom who get a period, 45,000 have decreased activity and access to education or sports. So then I thought, what else can we do to make greater equity in washrooms? What if we make them better for everybody? If you have a child with you, and the only family washroom is busy, where do you put your child in a public washroom so that you can go? Do you abandon them like luggage in the middle of an airport washroom, as I did? I know this is the men's room, but when I was at Pearson the other day, I thought it would be better to take pictures in the men's room than the women's room. So then the question was, what happens if you're using the family washroom, as many people probably have, and your toddler reaches over and looks at the big red button and pushes the barrier for your operator while you're using the bathroom, the door starts to swing open, and it's, oh my God. So then I thought, well, maybe the solution is to have seats like these in every washroom. That would be great because you can just kind of park your toddler in the back of a seat, and that's great. And these are common in Europe and Japan. And since this affects women more than men, I thought, well, we already make women's toilet stalls too small because there's already too crowded, they're narrow, there's a giant roll of toilet paper, there's a measly single hook to hang your coat, your bag, and your purse on, not to mention all of your shopping, because God forbid you put anything on the floor. And then you have a little garbage can, and there's all this other stuff that's in the women's washroom stall, and then the door swings into the stall, so it's even smaller and more awkward. I was reading, blogs about people falling onto the toilet, and the flusher goes off, and they're just sort of terror of this. And then you have a kicking toddler kicking their feet because you're busy, and they're trying to do things, so it's just miserable. So I thought, are our toilet stalls just too small? So as a male architect in a male-dominated field, not only will I continue working to build equity in my industry and my office, but I call on other male architects to stop stigmatizing these conversations. Let's have bigger conversations about basic personal needs. Let's build equity in washrooms by offering free pads and tampons in schools. Let's support organizations like the Period Purse and make something that's entirely normal, entirely normal. Expect the unexpected.
I don't know if any of you noticed Tone's shoes. He's trying to one-up me with my silver ones. I didn't wear them today. I'm full of regret right now. Hello. Hello. It's my pleasure to welcome Elspeth McKay. She's Executive Director of Operations Come Home.
So good morning, everyone. When I was asked to come and talk about inclusion and youth homelessness, I said to myself, gee, I'm not too sure what I might say about that topic. So it did take me quite a long time to try and think about what I will say, but I do have an example, a good example, of youth homelessness and inclusion in the neighborhood in which we operate, which is in downtown Ottawa and Centertown. So just for those of you that might not know what Operation Come Home is, we are a community economic development hub for at-risk youth. And what we're trying to do with youth that come to Operation Come Home, which is usually more than 500 a year, is to help them make a significant change. And that change needs to be centered around employment or school, because those two things are the things that have an impact on all of our lives. And so for homeless youth, that's equally as important. We also provide wraparound supports, mental health, addictions, housing, and all the usual things that everybody needs. And in 2017, the Alliance to End Homelessness reported that there were 802 homeless youth in the city of Ottawa. So what happens in a community when there are homeless youth or homeless people, period, that are causing disturbances, often causing disturbances? They disrupt people within their community because they have nowhere to go. And they often frighten people, whether that's older people, younger people. Businesses are often concerned about the number of homeless people that are panhandling in front of their businesses. They often cause trouble. They're on their skateboards, they're listening to music, they're rapping, they're doing slam poetry, they're doing whatever they want to do as if they were in their own living room. So sometimes there are also physical and verbal altercations, and that makes people frightened, and I can understand why that is. So in Centertown, we started to see an increase in homelessness, especially along Bank Street. And so we got together as a community and we started to figure out what we could do. So the first thing we did was ask some of the youth that we work with what they'd like to see. And then we got a hold of some politicians and some other the business community, the Bank Street BIA, and a whole bunch of other people that were interested, the Islam Center, all kinds of people that you would never think of that were interested in this issue. And so we got together, we got some cash, and we said, okay, this is what we're going to do. So we decided to work with all of the stakeholders that were interested. And we put together a list for businesses. And the list was basically, who should you call and what should you do when these circumstances happen with homeless people? And we did outreach with those, we did outreach with the youth that come to our programs and some of the staff, and we went and we talked to the businesses. And we talked to them about the issues, and we admitted that, you know, this is a problem and that this is a community issue. And most of the time, young people that are homeless are excluded. And instead of that happening in this circumstance, the businesses, the Bank Street BIA, the politicians, and all the other stakeholders, the residents of the community started to realize, okay, they're here. They're probably not going to go anywhere because they don't have anywhere to go. So let's try and figure out a way to include them. And so we started doing some activities. And we started figuring out the best way to engage homeless people is to actually provide them with resources, an opportunity to go somewhere, and to be with people, to socialize, to eat, to talk, and do the same things that we all like to do. And so we started doing that a couple of times a week. And as a result of that, we had some significant numbers. We engaged 375 people. We outreached to 65 businesses. And so, in short, that's an example of how homeless youth and homeless people in general can be engaged and included in one's community. So what are some of the solutions when you see a homeless person? It's a very touchy subject. I can understand that. I feel the same way. You can acknowledge a homeless person. You don't have to give them anything. You can say hi to them, or you can just make eye contact. That means a lot to people that don't have a place to live. You can hire them. The Bank Street BIA hires youth from Operation Come Home. Lots of employers hire youth from Operation Come Home. Even though they're homeless, you'd be very surprised how resilient they are, and quite frankly, they will show up for work if they're given an opportunity. So urban design of parks. As you know, a lot of the parks that have recently been redesigned have benches that have steel bars in the middle, and the reason for that is because they don't want homeless people to have a place to sleep on that bench. That's not necessarily inclusive in terms of the homeless population. Pay it forward in local establishments. This is going on in a couple of bakeries in Westboro, where you buy a loaf of bread or a cup of coffee and you leave one on a board for someone who might need it. And last but not least, education awareness to end the stigma, because most people, certainly young people that are homeless, are not there by choice. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it back over to Maxine.
Perfect. All right, last but certainly not least, I'd like to invite Sharon, a digital communicator and inclusive consultant. Thank you. You need anything? To die?
All right, those are tough acts to follow, so if I break down in tears, you know why. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Nyangweso, and in my day job as a consultant, I work to build digital solutions for youth and women around the world. I also work with organizations to help them build meaningful inclusion practices. As a Black woman, I know, shocker, and an immigrant, inclusion and diversity are issues that matter to me for obvious reasons. Because of this, and because I live and operate in the same world all of you do, a world where we face marginalization in a million small ways every day, I found a way to bridge my work with design principles with a vision for a more inclusive world. So we're all here this morning because we're interested in inclusion and diversity. It's a hot topic these days, from bridging the gender-digital divide and getting more women into tech, to making sure that there is equal representation in politics, to making sure that in rooms like this one today, we actually talk about inclusion and diversity in a meaningful way, and not just ticking off boxes to say, no, we had a conversation about it, it's all good. But there's a lot of complexity and nuance to inclusion. And, you know, it's really important for everyone in this room to take the time to investigate and be honest with yourself about the space you occupy in the world and why. You see, inclusion isn't just about bringing diverse voices into the room. And if you are bringing those diverse voices into the room, you have to make sure that you're making room for them to meaningfully contribute, to lead, and to showcase their expertise for the same length of time as less marginalized people. So I'm gonna go right, oh, good morning again. So if you're not doing that, if you're bringing marginalized people into the room, but not giving them the space to lead and to meaningfully contribute and to have the same space or length of time as less marginalized people, what you're not doing is, what you're not practicing is inclusion. You're practicing what I like to call diversity for PR. Great reaction, guys. All right, we could go into a lot of detail about the complexities of, you know, the emotional labor we place on minorities to explain the difference between inclusion and diversity. It's a lot to unpack, and it can't be done in 5 minutes, even by me, and I'm very good at this, as you can tell. Women like me are often brought into the room to take up the emotional labor of trying to help people understand why they should be more inclusive, empathetic, or aware of the social and cultural structures that inform the way we operate in the world. But I'm not here to unpack that today. It's time we move the conversation forward to action. So I'm here to provide you with the tools you need to meaningfully engage with people like myself, who are often brought into these spaces to take up the emotional burden of explaining why we should be respected as human beings. These tools will help you navigate these conversations with dignity, respect, and to co-create with the very people you're trying to engage with or to include. So because we're all here, and we're starting with action and moving really quickly into tools, I'm trusting that as a starting point, we're coming into this conversation with empathy and an understanding that identity is complex, diversity is complex. Your place in the world, my place in the world, for all of us, is emotionally charged. And I want you to take the time, I want to challenge you to really think about, no matter who you are, you're working in and living in and benefiting from power, privilege, and inequality. And so am I. But just knowing that, being a critical thinker, that's not enough. So like I said, I work with youth and women to design digital experiences, and I also work with organizations to help them move their visions for inclusivity from just ideas to real action. Those are two very different types of work. My calendar is confusing, but I've come to see a crucial overlap. So here we go. Here's how you can use design thinking to be more inclusive. So I suspect that many of you in this room are familiar with design principles like human-centered design, design thinking, or any other type of framework that helps us create solutions for systems and people. In my time, in the work I do, I use these frameworks every day. And what I've come to find is if we apply design thinking frameworks to the way we solve for inclusion, we can move past just bringing in women, Black, brown, Indigenous, transgender, and marginalized voices into the room as a diversity check mark, and move towards more meaningful and powerful participation and co-creation. You see, when you're using a design thinking framework, you're doing a few things. You're understanding the context of the people who are coming into your space with empathy. You're identifying the barriers to how they can engage with you meaningfully. You're designing the solution with the people you're trying to impact, and you're evaluating your work, again, with the people you're trying to impact. The important thing is that through all stages, you're working with your user. You're co-creating, you're prototyping, you're iterating with the people you're trying to impact. Now, imagine solving inclusion in your community, in your organization, in your community projects, whatever it is you're doing. You can apply a design thinking framework to almost any inclusion challenge and come out on the other side with a solution that works. And one of the ways you can navigate a little bit of difficult conversations, like the fact that I'm over time, that comes up in these spaces, is by using a couple of really interesting tools to help you be more collaborative. Some of these tools are empathy maps, journey maps, design sprints, and cyclical evaluations. Let's take journey maps, for instance. This is not a sexy look, but you guys just follow me. You can literally map out a person's journey or their time engaging with you while cross-checking for important inclusion considerations like trust, autonomy, safety, emotional labor, tokenism, and collaboration. Okay, so I don't have the time to go into a ton of detail, which I'm sure you're riveted about the ways you can use design thinking to solve for inclusion. So I'll leave you with this. If any of this resonated with you, come see me. But I do want to challenge all of you to take the time to really investigate and think deeply about the space you occupy in the world and the way you can use existing tools to help carry the burden of inclusion work. Thank you. Thank you, Maxine. You did amazing.
All right, so we will open the floor up now to any questions that you might have. We're going to run this mic. So, question, yes, of course.
Yeah, my question is actually for the sponsor from Lyft, if he's still here.
Uh-oh.
Is he? Great. My question is that your rival is rather well known for not being inclusive in terms of disability services and offering wheelchair rides and giving benefits to drivers, and I'm wondering what you're doing in Ottawa to counter that.
Thank you. And it's one of the things that I'm here to address. So Lyft, every ride you take with Lyft, we take 7 cents and we give it to the city because to support wheelchair accessible vehicles and people with disabilities. And so at the end of 2018, we and Uber is a part of this as well, contributed $1.2 million from that pool into the city for them to go and spend on making accessible vehicles better, faster, safer, more vehicles. And then they have a committee that is headed up by Councillor Sudds in order to distribute that money. And I'll be very candid, we were very disappointed with where that money was going. Instead of putting new cars on the road, new fleets, new buses, or wheelchair accessible vehicles, they opted to hand out taxi chits. And so if you have a challenge with it, we have a challenge with it. It is one of my burning topics. And you have to stand up and say, this is not acceptable. And so I've asked the city to professionalize that fund. It's not mandated by the city, both of these companies are donating the money, and we would like to be a part of the governance as to where that goes. So this is a huge issue, and I implore you to speak to your councillors, speak to the city about it.
Oh, right up front.
Hello. I have a question for Elspeth McKay. I'm just I've heard that there is a large percentage of at-risk youth on the street who are LGBTQ+. I'm just curious if your organization does anything to support this marginalized contingent of youth. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. There is a large contingency of LGBTQ2S youth in Ottawa, and an increase over the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years. And we have a lot of young people that we serve. I would say that the programming that we offer in our employment area is one of the better ones in terms of helping young people find work. And we've brought in lots of speakers, and we've tried to talk about accommodation and inclusion with respect to youth, regardless of what their circumstances. So they're very much welcome, and we do work very hard to help them find work and also to finish school.
Hi there. I think this is best addressed to Sharon, but a lot of organizations are following equitable hiring practices, and whether that's the best way to have to be inclusive or not, I'm not sure. But a lot of opponents say that you're stifling innovation by not hiring the best candidate. And my question is, how do you convince critics that pursuing diversity is actually an investment in the future?
That's a good question. And I'll ask you first, well, not you, but I would ask them first, why is the assumption that the best candidate is not part of a marginalized community? So you have to start from the fact that you're making that very assumption. Okay. Hold the applause for later. So you start there, and then you start by considering the fact that people, with equitable hiring practices, they're fantastic, but there's the assumption that the problem is that we can't get people through the door. People love jobs, people love money. I personally don't love paying my rent, but I love being able to pay my rent. So the problem isn't bringing people into the room. The problem is creating an environment where there's a reason for them to stay. And I like to think of it as the difference between collaboration and validation. If you're bringing people in to do that very same diversity for PR, but not creating a space where they can use their expertise, that great stuff that they bring with them, but you're just bringing them there to validate yourself as an organization, validate yourself as, we've done the check mark, then you're already failing at that point. All right.
I have a question for the young parents. I work with a lot of students and young professionals, and it seems that they wait and wait and wait to start the important things in life, that is to have a family. What advice do you have for young people who are waiting sometimes too late to have children?
That's a loaded question. So firstly, you might not know if you can have children if you wait, is what I would say in my experience. And life is short, so if you want to do something, I believe you should do it. And the reason I've been bringing my children into these environments is because I feel like you just have to do what you want to do and not wait for permission, and I always ask for forgiveness instead. And in my experience, most people have pleasantly surprised me. They're very helpful. Everyone is human after all. So I think it's a very personal question. So I would just say, if you want something, don't wait for it. Don't wait for it to be handed to you. Don't wait for someone to say that it's okay. Just go for it and look at other people who've already done it. If they're around you, if you can reach out to them, ask for guidance and support, and then just go for it.